Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Back in the 1990s, I used to work as an advertising executive in Baltimore when I lived in New York City every day. The commute was really tiring, but I really enjoyed my job. I would wake up around 6 in the morning, would take the 3 train to Penn Station, and when I arrived there, I would usually catch a 7:15 Amtrak, and the train ride would normally be 2 hours and 15 minutes. I would do this every day without any problems. Only this one day would put a sad end to this streak. It was a Friday morning, and I hopped on a 6:15 3 train like every day. There was no issue so far. Around 6:23, we then arrived at the third to last stop before entering Manhattan, and then we took off from that train station about a minute later. Around 6:26 or 6:27, the train came to a complete stop. I was surprised because trains wouldn't usually stop this early in the morning, as less people took the train at this time. I waited for about 5 minutes before the conductor came on the speaker and said, "We're extremely sorry for the delay. There is an issue going on and we're trying to resolve this ASAP. Thank you for your patience." I was annoyed because I didn't want to be late for work, as my boss would lose his shit if anyone was late. Time kept going by, and now I was on the train for like 40 minutes. Now, I was getting concerned. What the hell could be going on out there? 20 minutes later, the conductor came on the speaker again and said, "We are all so sorry that we're being held here for this long. We're expected to be here for a while now. Thank you for your patience." An hour had already passed by, and everyone in the subway car started to get very anxious and grumpy. And 10 minutes later, I would have the most disturbing moment of my life. Right outside of my subway car, I heard a bunch of gunshots and yelling. Someone must have had intentions of killing somebody. I was so frightened at this moment that I could only sit and wait until the train would move again. Everyone else in the car felt the same way. For like the next 35 minutes, I would hear constant sirens above me. Every police department in the city had to have been called. I would also hear loud talking outside of the car, and I could tell a huge crime scene was going on. Time still flew by, and I was still stuck in the tunnel. Around 8:30-ish, the train finally moved again and everybody cheered happily so loudly. There was still no signals, as we were still underground. And we then arrived at the next stop, and we were all forced to exit the train, as the whole line would be shut down for the remainder of the day. I then called my boss and told him that I wouldn't be coming to work today, and I explained to him what exactly had happened. He then said that it was all good and hoped that I was safe and sound. After getting off the phone and then walking up to the police officer, I asked him what happened. He told me that they couldn't tell anybody what the situation is and that I would have to find out in tomorrow's newspaper. I said thank you, and I then walked out of the station and hailed a taxi all the way back home. The next morning, I went outside of my apartment front door to grab my newspaper. I picked it up, and what I read on the front page, I felt as if my heart went into my stomach. On Thursday night, a homeless man stole a gun from a gun shop and ran off. Nobody was able to catch him as he ran so fast. Later, he would enter a train station not too far from my station and then would jump on the tracks and run away, as witnesses said. He then hid from the police between multiple stops from night until morning, and it was at the station that I stopped around the time that I was on the train that a security guard working behind the surveillance cameras spotted a homeless man on the tracks and then informed the train conductor about this, which resulted in the train stopping for an estimated 2 hours and 30 minutes. During this gruesome time period, the police were called and they kept searching for the man everywhere until the police and us heard gunshots from underneath the train and the cops fired back at the man. He was immediately killed after being shot. It then took a while before the other police and EMTs arrived at the scene and then carried the dead body of the homeless man in a body bag. About 5 years later, I quit that job because I got a higher paying job offer that was in the city and I didn't have to commute all the way down to Baltimore. After this scary incident, I am extremely afraid of guns, and whenever I see one at a store or on TV, the memory keeps playing back in my head of when I heard shots fired right outside and underneath the subway car that I was in. This event happened in late 2004. It was my senior year in high school and I couldn't wait to graduate. I went to a school called Winston Prep, which is located in the Union Square area in New York City. It was a special education school that goes from 6th to 12th grade. At an early age, I was diagnosed with severe ADHD and OCD. Some others had Asperger's or autism, excluding severe autism. I would mostly talk to the people who were like me because we could understand social cues and be more normal than the others. My school never went by grades but rather by disability, and we would have the same learning classes with the same exact people. I would mostly get along with everyone in my class. Everyone in my class was pretty friendly and acted normal. But there was this one guy who was really messed up in the head. His name was Quentin. I always saw him as a weird kid because he didn't have that many friends and he would always stare at people, which included me. But besides that, I didn't really have any problem with him because he was a pretty chill dude, as I thought he was, and I could actually have a conversation with him. There was this one day when my history teacher was talking about the 2004 presidential election because it was coming up, and George W. Bush was running again for president for the Republican Party. And I am not trying to stereotype politics here, but Republicans aren't that strict when it comes to gun laws. Anyways, the teacher asked the whole class, "So, who do you want to win for president? George W. Bush for the Republican Party or John Kerry for the Democratic Party?" When it was Quentin's turn, he said that he wanted Bush to win. He gave his reasons, but his main reason is gun laws. He said everyone should protect themselves if they're armed with guns. He then told the whole class that he owned a BB gun and plans on bringing it to school one day. We all laughed and thought that he was actually joking. And later on in the semester, that turned out not to be the case. One day, Quentin didn't come to class. I thought he was just sick, but I turned out to be wrong. It was 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, and I was already in my second class of the day. The day started off how it usually would, but 5 minutes into the class, we heard the lockdown siren go off. The teachers would usually inform us that we would have a lockdown drill or a fire drill that day before the drill itself. But I knew for a fact that this was not a drill because they never informed us the day before. About 10 minutes into the lockdown, I heard a bunch of commotion outside of my classroom. I didn't know what was going on because the blinds were shut and we weren't supposed to know because a real-life lockdown was taking place. I also kept hearing a bunch of lockers slamming as if someone was getting pushed onto them. After that, We heard the stairway door open, and then there was silence. I would say like 3 minutes later, the principal announced on the loudspeaker that the lockdown was over and that the school would be closing early that day because of our safety. I then exited the school and I turned on my flip phone. I had a flip phone because this was before Samsungs and the iPhones came out. I would have it off during school because I didn't want to get it confiscated and I wanted to learn in school. I got a text from my friend saying, "Dude, this is crazy. Quentin just got arrested for bringing a BB gun to school." And I remember a month earlier that he said that he planned on bringing it one day. Everyone thought that it was a joke, but he sure as hell was not joking. I didn't know what intentions he had with that gun, but logically, it was something not good. I was able to finish my senior year strong, and I am currently an English teacher at a middle school. I don't know where Quentin is today, and to be honest, I don't really care. But I am 85% sure that his life went nowhere to this day. I was a junior at George Mason University in Virginia in 2022. I have since graduated last spring with a degree in musical theater. I stayed another year because of credit issues. During 2021 to 2024, I worked as an RA to keep myself productive. I enjoyed my job at times because I would throw events as RAs could do that, and I would also talk to other residents who live in the dorms. Other times, I would enjoy it. The 2022 spring semester was coming right up, and I moved in a day earlier because I was told to. The next day then came, and people were moving in. It was a busy day, and I was tired of walking around and helping people move in, and I barely got to sit down. Around 3 in the afternoon, a kid named Brandon arrived and was ready to move in. I introduced myself, checked him in, and he was all settled in. But something about him made me feel a little off. He seemed very socially awkward, and I assumed that he was somewhat on the spectrum. But that didn't really bother me. I didn't worry about it too much, and I just helped everyone else move in for the rest of the day. It was now March, and I was having a pretty great semester to say the least. I got a part that I wanted that I auditioned for. I made a lot of new friends, and more importantly, I was getting good grades. We would rehearse every day, and one day, a band joined the rehearsals. Once they came, I saw who everyone in the band was. One face that I recognized in that band. It was Brandon, a guy who dormed in the building that I worked in. He was the drummer for the band, and I felt impressed that there was someone that I knew outside of my classes that I would be seeing now regularly, considering how big the college actually is. When we were rehearsing together, he would continuously stare at me. I felt really uneasy, but I would just pretend that I didn't notice that he stared at me. I figured that he must have a crush on me. We were together for, I would say, like a month and a half, and then we had our show and that was that. I was so happy that we had finally finished with that play for 2 reasons. 1, we worked our asses off and now we could have free time. And 2, that boy Brandon won't have to stare at me anymore. I would still have to see him though, because he stayed in the same building as me while working as an RA. It was now late April and there were like 2 weeks left of school. Nothing happened for the next week, but a week later, something happened that never in a million years that I thought would have ever happened to me. On a Thursday night, it was my turn to work as the RA. Nothing happened for an hour, everything was chill, and I was on my phone scrolling through Instagram. But all of a sudden, I heard footsteps approaching me, and when I turned my head up, I saw pure horror. Right in front of me was Brandon. This time, he was completely naked, and worst of all, he was smiling at me. I couldn't believe what my eyes were seeing. I then was sending blow-up texts to all of my friends in a group chat about what was going on. As I was doing that, I then heard another pair of footsteps. It was his roommate Steven. He was running and he begged me not to call the resident hall director. I said okay, and I saw him literally pulling and dragging Brandon to their room, and then they went out of view. I was still processing what was going on, and I decided that I will take a short walk to clear my brain. I listened to Steven and I didn't call the resident hall director. Saturday then came, and Brandon moved out that day. I had to act normal for my job. I saw his dad come to help him move out, and I helped him as well. Although I didn't tell my boss what he did, I did tell his dad. I expected him to completely lose it at Brandon, but he quite frankly did the complete opposite. He assured me that he just has autism and that he isn't harmful. Using autism as an excuse for what he did is unacceptable. Most autistic people would not do that as far as my knowledge, unless you have severe autism. The only thing that I could think of was that he had an episode. I then checked Brandon out, and then he and his father left. I now felt peace as they were gone. I told a few friends what had happened, and they told me something even more devastating. A formal dance took place 2 weeks ago, and I didn't end up going. At the dance, Brandon apparently took pictures under numerous girls' skirts, which included some of my friends. No girl knew about this until one guy told this to every girl who fell victim. I was extremely disgusted to hear this. But I never saw Brandon after this. He either left school or moved to another campus. The scene of him keeps replaying in my head every day, and I had to immediately see a therapist after this. I was so traumatized, but I'm pretty relieved that I didn't see him again, and I would want to keep it that way. When I was a kid, there were a group of us kids that pretty much spent every day of our childhood together. For the most part of it was myself, Chuck, and Billy, and the three of us were like brothers. We did everything together. We camped in each other's backyards and spent way too many hours of our days off together. Billy ended up moving away sophomore year, but beyond that, we literally grew up together, from elementary school through the years we all graduated. And Billy actually came back home so we could all have a party when he and Chuck finished high school. My point with that is that we were inseparable best friends, and we are still in touch with each other. Now, while the three of us were obviously really close, there was a fourth person in our group for a while, and that was a little girl named Katie. Katie had lived in our block for a few years before we met, and the whole time I knew her, it was just her and her dad that lived at that house. He was a single parent, and none of us had met her mother. Katie was my age, so a year older than the other two. And she was nothing short of a bit strange, though we did end up figuring out why when all was said and done. And nowadays, I actually feel bad for how we treated her for being weird. I met Katie when I was around 8. She was, to the best of my knowledge, the only girl in the neighborhood that was in our age range. So when we met, it was pretty obvious that she was going to latch onto our trio. We were 8 and 9-year-old boys, so we were a bit annoyed that there was going to be a girl with us since we were still at that age where girls were a foreign concept. At first, Katie was fine with the three of us though. She was interested in some of the things that we were, and she was willing to play our dumb games. We would sword fight with our toy swords, and she was willing to jump in and take a few hits. And she could actually hold her own. She was interested in animals, so she was willing to help me dig up my yard to look for bugs. Basically, she was one of us for the most part. Except when she wasn't herself. Katie was fine probably 95% of the time. But then, sometimes, she would just be a bit out there. Like she was a completely different person. Those times where she would be different, she would sometimes get violent or angry or just really, really strange. I know that's vague, and I'm not going to get into all the instances where things were wrong, but I will explain a few of them. The first event of note was one day when we were at Chuck's house and we were taking turns playing a game on his Super Nintendo. That was typically something we did once a week, and we weren't allowed to stay cooped up in the house every day, so it was always super exciting for all of us. I think we were playing one of the Mario games, I'm not sure which one, and then it was Katie's turn. Katie wasn't great at the game, but she usually took her losses with grace and just laughed about it each time that she messed up. But not this time. This time she was playing, and she misjudged the jump and then ended up dying. Obviously, when this happened, we all chuckled as we did when one of us made a mistake and died. But she didn't. She had a flat stare and then she stood up, and by the time the game took us back to the level select screen, Katie had literally jumped up and stomped down on the Nintendo. She smashed it with all of her body weight, and while the console was mostly okay, the game ended up bending and snapping in half. Obviously, we all freaked out, and Chuck started bawling his eyes. This Super Nintendo was his pride and joy. Katie then looked over at Chuck and then put her hands around his throat, literally choking him, and she was telling him to stop crying, that he needed to grow up, and that he wasn't a baby, and that if he wanted to cry, then she would give him something to cry about. Billy and I jumped into action, and we pulled her away from Chuck, leaving this whole situation a confusing disaster, and Chuck sitting there looking horrified. Chuck's dad came in to figure out what happened, and we had to explain to him what Katie had done. Strangely enough, Katie actually agreed with our statements, and she was willing to own what happened. She said she was angry and that she wanted to destroy it, so she did. She said that Chuck was crying over nothing and that he needed to grow up. I honestly don't know what really happened after that because Chuck's dad told us to go home. But I do know that Katie's dad bought him a new game, and Katie wasn't really allowed at Chuck's house anymore after that happened. In fact, I don't think Chuck and Katie really spent any time together after this, for good reason. I don't want to really get into all the events that Katie caused, because this story would go on for ages, but I do want to go over one of the last things that ended up happening, the thing that I think may have actually caused Katie to be a bit odd. This was around a year after the whole thing with Chuck happened. I was on my own that day, and I went out into the woods that were behind our neighborhood. I was out there pretending that I was some kind of adventurer. And who else would I see but Katie? I went over to talk to her, but as I approached, I noticed something weird. Katie was sitting on the ground, her back against a tree, and was eating a sandwich while just talking to no one in particular. I walked up to her to ask her who she was talking to, and when she noticed me, she jumped and screamed that I shouldn't be there. I was obviously taken aback and scared, and I asked what I had done wrong. She then started going on about how I was upsetting her mother, how she was having dinner with her, and I wasn't invited. I kind of just looked around and mentioned that she was alone, that her mother wasn't there. But that was definitely the wrong thing to say, because then Katie flipped out. She started screaming at me aggressively that her mother lived in the woods, that I wasn't allowed to be anywhere near her mother, and that I needed to go home before she hurt me. Again, I was confused, but I just said that I was sorry and that I didn't know. Strangely enough, Katie shifted from psychotic and ready to pounce to almost sympathetic. She said that it was okay, that if I was really, really sorry, that she wouldn't be mad at me anymore and that I was welcome to sit with them. I hesitantly agreed with her, mostly because I will admit that at this time in our relationship, I actually did have a crush on her. So sitting with her was something that I was more than willing to do. Yes, I had a crush on Katie, in spite of her random strange behavior. I sat at one of the trees and I just watched her eat her sandwich and talk. She was talking about school, about all the things that she was going through, and what she was going to be doing that week. She was talking to no one in particular, like she was basically telling her mother about her life. I was a bit curious, so I waited for an opening and I actually asked her where her mother was. Well, this is where things turned to haunting. Katie looked at me and started crying, like full-on sobbing. I kind of freaked out. I didn't mean to make her cry, so I scooted over to her and I gave her a big hug and I asked her what was wrong. Katie then pulled away and told me that her mother lived in the woods because one night she and her father got into an argument and her dad hurt her. I will say that we were 10, so this was a whole new thing to me. My parents were always happily married, so I didn't understand the situation of my dad hurt my mom. That idea was just impossible to me. I asked how he hurt her, why he hurt her, and so forth, basically interrogating this poor crying girl. And she stopped crying, pulled away from me, and she told me something that made my blood run cold. She looked me in the eyes and said, "My mom's not really living out here. She's dead. My dad killed her. He killed her and then buried her out here in the woods. I saw him do it. He doesn't know that I saw, though. He doesn't know that I know what he did. He doesn't know that I watched him choke her until she died. He doesn't know that I watched him dig that hole and then bury her. I watched him do it." She kind of started just rambling all of this and shifting between crying and not crying. And looking back, she was clearly traumatized. I honestly think that this is what caused her to be strange and aggressive. She saw this horrifying event and didn't know how to process it. Of course, I told my parents what she said, but being my age, I didn't know what else to do, but I told them what she said to me. Of course, my parents called the cops and they reported what Katie had said, and all of it was this huge mess. The cops ended up doing an investigation, talking with Katie about everything, taking reports from her and her father and asking me about everything. And then they did the excavation. This is where things went from weird to absolutely devastating. They dug up the spot in the woods and they actually did find the body of a woman. Katie wasn't lying or making any of it up. Her dad had actually killed her mother, and he actually did bury her in the woods, which tells me that she really did watch this all play out. To wrap this up, Katie ended up leaving town to live with someone else in her family. Her father was arrested, and all of this was my fault because she trusted me and I told my parents. Obviously, I did the right thing. Her mother deserved justice, and looking back at it as an adult, not telling anyone would have been the worst thing to do. That said, I will never let go of the fact that I changed a huge portion of her life. She was a weird girl, but she was my friend, and I did like her, and because I told my parents what she told me, her whole life changed direction. I never saw her again. And that day where she told me about what happened was the last time that we ever spoke. I never got to say goodbye or anything. I do hope that her life went back to normal after this, as normal as it could be. I hope that she found peace because she deserved it, and I hope that someday she and I can talk again so I can tell her that I am sorry for all the things that she went through. Katie, if you ever read or hear this story, please know that I have never forgotten you, and I mention your name every single time that I pray. Hi everyone, my name is Valerie, and this is something that happened to me a few years ago. Like many young people starting college, I was both excited and nervous. I had gotten into the university that I wanted, but it was a 2-hour drive from my home. Commuting for 4 hours every single day was not something that I wanted to do. So, after getting permission from my dad, I started searching for a place closer to school. For 2 days, I scoured the area, but I found nothing within my budget. Most apartments were too expensive. And finally, I stumbled upon a place that was cheap and conveniently located. The catch? It was near an abandoned hospital. Well, I didn't really care much for that. Creepy or scary places never bothered me. Ever since I was young, I'd experienced unexplainable things, so this was nothing to me. I would also like to mention that I had a boyfriend at that time, and my boyfriend was someone who could see things that others couldn't, if you know what I mean. The first couple of months went by smoothly. The university was great and I loved my classes. My boyfriend and I were comfortable passing by the abandoned hospital too. We mostly walked by it in the morning, maybe late afternoon, or the early evening, but nothing ever strange happened. But one night, my school hosted a pageant. It was an event open to outsiders, so I invited my boyfriend to join me. The activities wrapped at around 2 a.m., and we decided to head to my place. It was a 15-minute walk, and we had to pass by the hospital. I didn't really think much of it, and he didn't too, because we've passed by there multiple times and nothing ever creeped us, spooked us out, or happened to us. But as we got closer to the hospital, a strange feeling crept over me. It was hard to describe. I was about to mention it to my boyfriend when I noticed him staring intently at something. He seemed focused, almost as if he were holding his breath, bracing himself. His grip on my hand also tightened. I tried asking what was wrong, but he didn't respond. When we were near the hospital, he then whispered to me, "Val, walk faster." His voice was tense and low. I did as he said, though I was confused. Something about his demeanor unsettled me. I was about to glance back when he said, No, don't look back, just walk faster." I have always been a bit stubborn, so despite his warning, I looked back. But there was no one there. I couldn't see anything at all. My boyfriend was sweating at this time and we picked up our pace to a jog. He then tried to explain to me and said that a woman was following us. As I mentioned before, I didn't see anyone or anything when I turned around, and that's when I understood that this woman that he is talking about is something that he can only see. He then glanced back and then looked at me. Fear etched across his face. He said, "Run." I had never seen him like this before. He was scared out of his wits, so we ran, sprinting the rest of the way to my house. And once inside, I quickly locked the door and we collapsed on the floor, gasping for air. My boyfriend finally told me what he had seen. He said that it was a woman in white standing near the hospital. At first, he thought she was just a passerby, until she looked up and then he saw her eyes. They were completely black. He knew that something was off, and as we passed her, She started following us. She moved unnaturally, and that's when it told me to run. Even though I continued to walk by the hospital until I graduated, I made sure never to do it late at night. That experience was enough to teach me to trust my instincts and my boyfriend's gift. I learned to respect the things that we couldn't understand, and while I never saw that woman myself, the memory of my boyfriend's fear is something that I will never forget. This morning was the worst morning of my life, and let me tell you why. I woke up at around 7 in the morning like I always do for work. I turned off my alarm, and then I swiped to unlock my phone. After unlocking my phone, I went to my camera app to see if I had any pimples on my face because I was too lazy to go check in the mirror as I was still waking up. Then, I went from 10 to 100 real quick when I saw an image or video at the bottom left on the screen. I don't remember having this on my camera because the last time that I took a photo was 3 days ago, and I remembered exactly what I took a photo of. When I clicked on it, I saw that it was a video. I pressed play, and when I watched this video, I felt as if my whole world was coming to an end. The video shows someone entering my room, walking up to my bed, and then coming right next to me. This person then clearly kneeled down, and it showed my face facing the camera, capturing me sleeping and snoring. I felt like I was going to vomit after watching it. I'm very surprised that I didn't wake up from this. I tend not to be that deep of a sleeper. This person was most likely an intruder. I then walked around my whole apartment and checked if anything was stolen. Thankfully, nothing was stolen. But I also saw that I accidentally forgot to lock my door after I came home, and I felt like a complete idiot not doing this. What person could do this thing? This person just walked through my apartment, came into my room, grabbed my phone, walked out of my door, only to come back and take a video of me sleeping. I texted all my friends asking if they did this just to mess and play a joke on me. But everyone responded with a firm no, and I believed all of them. I felt more of an idiot for not having any sort of passcode or face ID on my phone. I then changed that after eating my breakfast. I then went to my Photos app and checked if this was actually recorded on my phone. I then went to the media type section, and it said that it was airdropped to my phone. I decided that I would not report this to the police because there was nothing that they could really do. After all, I do live alone with no security cameras, and I simply just forgot to lock the door. I then got myself together and I went on about the rest of my day, pretending like it never had happened. I don't know what the intruder's goal was for recording a video of me sleeping and not stealing anything in my apartment. It's very strange to say the least. Maybe they were just trying to scare me and have me intimidated every night. I hope not. I'm about to go to sleep now, and I hope something like this doesn't happen again this morning. This time, I remembered to lock my door. However, I am still paranoid that this will happen again sometimes, and I have a bold assumption that this person never left my apartment and is still hiding somewhere as I speak. This was something that happened when I was around 4 or 5 years old. Of course, I know I was really young, so I didn't have all the details. So this was also put together with the help from my dad, as it involved the two of us. I remembered parts of this from my perspective, but I'll also include what my dad saw and experienced, so I apologize if it does jump around some. This was sometime in the early 90s. My family, which was my mom, my dad, my baby sister, and I, lived near the border of Oklahoma and Texas. My dad had gotten a phone call about his mom falling ill, and they were afraid that she wouldn't make it much longer, so he wanted to go be with her in Mexico. Both of my parents were working full-time jobs, so they were kind of stuck. My mom wouldn't be able to watch both of us while working, but they also couldn't afford to have us all go, so they decided that my dad would take me with him since I was older, and my mom would stay at home with my sister since she was a newborn anyways and could bring her with her to work. So, my mom made us some food for the road, and after packing a bag for both of us and bringing my favorite toys, we headed out late one night. That way, we could get through a lot of driving while I slept, plus it was a little cooler. It was the middle of summer, and it was unbearably hot. The AC was barely working, and we couldn't have it on at all times. Otherwise, the car would start running funny. We also had a very old car that could fall apart at any time, so driving at night was almost preferable. Unfortunately, we started having troubles with the car in the middle of the drive. I remember seeing a lot of white smoke, and my dad said it was sputtering. And thank God that we were not on a deserted and empty part of the highway. With his hazards on, he was able to slowly take an exit, got past and stared by multiple cars, and then rolled into the parking lot of a rundown truck stop. I do remember being my young self, asking some form of, "Are we there yet?" To which my dad told me that we had to fix the car. Instead of pulling into a parking spot, he pulled up to the curb and close to the building. There was a picnic table in the grass nearby that had an umbrella over it. My dad pulled me out of the car and had me sitting on the table, and he gave me a few of my toys and a juice box. He told me to stay there no matter what while he looked at the car. As mentioned, it was very hot that day, and when we talked about this when I was older, he told me that he didn't want to leave me in the car and risk me overheating, so he thought that the next best thing would be to sit me there in the shade. I was still pretty close to him, where all he had to do was to turn his head to the left, and then he would see me and would probably hear me if I tried talking to him. The problem, however, wouldn't be with me overheating, but himself. He said that he was already feeling ill and felt like his blood pressure was high, but he chalked it up to just being stressed out and hot. He said after finding out with what was wrong with it, he would sit with me to relax for a bit before we got back on the road. But he wouldn't get that far. He popped the hood, got in the driver's seat to get something, and then passed out. I didn't know anything was happening, so I just sat on the bench as I was told and shared my juice with me and my stuffed animal that I had. At one point, I saw a man walking out the store, and I remember thinking that he reminded me of my uncle. My Uncle Louis was a truck driver, and he always had on a pair of overalls. He also had a cowboy hat and sunglasses. This man was dressed the same way, so when he looked at me and smiled, I smiled and I waved back. I watched him as he walked along the side of the building, seeming to be looking around, and then he did a sharp turn and headed back in my direction. He then stood right across from me and said hello. I said hi back, and I asked him if he knew Uncle Louis. He laughed, and then said he thought he did, and asked who I was with. I told him my dad, and I pointed to our car. The guy then said something like, "Oh, it looks like your daddy could use some help. How about we surprise him with some ice cream? It's really hot out here." Again, I was very young. I knew that it was hot because my dress was sticking to me and starting to make me feel uncomfortable. But I could also tell that something was wrong with my dad by the way he was acting and how much he was sweating. This guy also seemed very nice, and because he did appear to be like my uncle, I thought that it would be okay. I also thought that this was supposed to help my dad, either with a car or to cool off or maybe just to make him happy, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to help him, so I agreed to go with him. I stood up, I went to walk around the other side of the bench, and I grabbed the man's hand. As we started walking, that was about the same time that my dad woke up. He said that when he came to, his immediate thought was me. He didn't know how long he had been out, so he jumped out of the car and saw me walking away with this unknown man. That's when he started running towards us, but he said that his legs felt like concrete, so his next option was to yell for me. The only thing he managed to get out was, "Maria, peligro!" which was basically danger in Spanish. He was bilingual, and I was starting to learn Spanish with my English, but I didn't know it very well. But one of the things that I was taught was stranger danger. However, we would later learn this, but my dad was amid a heat stroke, so with being very weak, all he could muster was danger. After shouting this, he then stumbled forward, falling to the ground, hitting his head on the curb. Hearing the fear in my father's usually booming voice really startled me, and when I saw him fall, I immediately screamed and the guy I was walking with took off. My dad and I both remember the guy being white, but of course, I didn't know if he knew Spanish and what he just said, or if it was just the fact that my dad caught him, so he took off. I ran to my dad, who was now on the ground, and all I knew to do was to scream and cry and shaking him to get him to wake up. A lady in the truck stop heard all of this and then ran out to try and help. And after that, it all kind of ran together. I remember a few other people helping by, putting cold rags on my dad. I remember the ambulance coming and then my dad waking up. They had to calm him down as he was panicking because he couldn't see me initially. The lady was sitting on the bench with me, trying to keep me calm and out of the EMT's way. When I called out for him though, and he knew that I was okay, he then started to calm down too. I know the EMTs wanted him to go to the hospital to see if he had a concussion, but he refused. After he cooled down, he said that he was feeling much better and that he needed to fix his car so we could all get back on the road. The lady that was with me had my dad pull his car into the truck garage to take a look at it while he rested inside the AC. My dad said the issue had something to do with the radiator, and they only asked him to pay for the part which they had and that they wouldn't charge for the labor. I remember the lady being very kind. She asked me questions about myself and my family while the EMTs were there. She gave me a push pop and some water and let me keep the little pool stuffed animal toy thing. It was like the water footballs that you toss around in a pool, but it was a rabbit, I think. She had soaked it in cold water for me to help keep me cool too. So, to wrap things up, the guy unfortunately fled. He was driving a big truck, so they had his license plate number and knew the business thanks to the giant logo on the trailer. We used this to contact the company and the police to report it, but my dad said that he never heard anything back, so we assume that they either never found or caught the guy, or unfortunately, they didn't take it seriously. We did make it to Mexico with a day to spare before his mom passed. It was one hell of a trip for us, and I became even closer to my dad after that. It's like we really became partners, always watching out for each other. Growing up, I knew I was adopted, My parents were always very open about it with me and gave me as much information as they knew or could when I asked questions. They have and always will be my parents to me. But as I got older, I was curious about my biological parents. I wanted to know more about them, who they were and what they looked like. And not to mention, I thought that it was important to know about any possible genetic and health concerns. So with the information I was given by my parents and the adoption place that they went through, I was able to learn more about my mother as she consented to be contacted by me if I wanted to. I spoke to my biological mother on the phone, and to my surprise, she was happy to hear from me, and the conversation just felt natural. Because of how well this went, I made plans to go and meet her in person. However, she lived in Utah, and my family and I lived in Wyoming, so I made a solo road trip out of it. My parents were even happy for me and encouraged it. I was in a great mindset at that time, and things were going well, and I felt like I was both getting closure and filling holes in my life. It was a great day to be on the road. The weather was perfect, there was minimal traffic, and I was just enjoying the drive while also playing out different scenarios and making plans with my biological mother. However, as the sun was beginning to set, I started to become tired, but I guess because I was too excited, I didn't want to sleep yet. So instead, I stopped to get a bite to eat, hoping that it might give me some energy to keep going. It worked for a few hours, but ultimately, I wasn't going to be able to avoid it. I had taken long trips like this before on my own, and I didn't need much, so I typically slept in my car rather than getting a hotel room. I took the next exit, and I pulled into the parking lot of a store that was 24 hours. I felt those were at least safer as there were always someone there, and in case that I needed a restroom, I had one available. I actually did go in the store. I think it was like a convenience store, but not a gas station as there were no pumps there. I grabbed something to drink, used the restroom, and I started heading back to my car. As I was walking there, I started hearing someone shouting from behind me. It was as if they were trying to get someone's attention, so it didn't sound alarming, scary, or angry. But since it was shouting nonetheless, I turned around to see what was happening. I saw a normal guy, maybe in his 40s. His hair was long and stringy, and he also had a pretty long beard. He was wearing jeans and a denim jacket with a dark-colored shirt under it. And to my surprise, he was waving me down. I stopped to hear him out as he was caught up to me, and he asked if I had a cigarette. I apologized and I told him that I didn't smoke, and he seemed like he was trying to figure out something else to say or ask. He then looked at my hand as I was carrying my bottle of tea and asked if I had anything else to drink. The guy seemed completely normal and maybe just a little down on his luck or something. Or hell, maybe he was just a mooch and trying to get anything he could for free. Either way, he wasn't being aggressive or annoying, so I pulled out the change that I got from my purchase. I paid with a 10, so I had like 5 left and some ones that I just shoved in my pocket, and I just gave it to the man. He smiled and seemed genuinely thankful for it, making a comment how he would be able to get smokes and also a drink with it. I just kind of smiled back and said something like, "Oh, no problem, man. Enjoy your night." He waved goodbye and then headed back towards the store. I then got in my car. I had parked close to the front, and then I drove it to the back of the lot, parked, and then settled in to sleep for the night. I drifted off to sleep pretty quickly, but then I remember hearing what sounded like scratching. I was still in half of a sleep state and thought that it was part of my dream. You know that feeling, kind of like when you hear your alarm in your dream. But then, when the sound became faster and a bit louder, it finally jolted me awake and I looked around to find the source of the sound. It didn't take me long to figure out, because when I looked over the passenger door, I saw the same guy from earlier messing with my door handle. I turned on my cab light and I cracked the window on my side, the driver's side, and I asked him what the hell he was doing. The guy didn't even jump or look away from the handle when I did this, so I knocked on the passenger window to get his attention. He finally looked up at me, and with a deadpan look on his face, he asked if I would let him in so we could talk. However, something seemed off. The monotone way that he said it, and how he was so persistent on trying the door put me on the edge. So, I didn't unlock the door or anything, but I asked what he wanted to talk about. He would refuse to answer. He just kept saying in the same robotic voice, "I just want to talk about things. Please open the door." Again, that uneasy feeling was still there, and even though I gave this guy some money, there was still no way that I was going to let this stranger in my car in a small enclosed area. I told him that I couldn't and that I needed to sleep, but he just shouted no at me and continued trying the handle, but getting more aggressive with it. After this going on for a few minutes, trying to figure out what I could do to get him to leave, I decided that it was best to just leave. I put my keys in the glove box, and as I went to grab them, this guy's demeanor changed. He began kicking the door and slamming into the window. I could see it slightly bend and began to worry that he would actually manage to break it. With my hands now shaking, I tried to put the key in the ignition and start the car. I managed to get it started and burned out before he could break the window at least. But I had to go around the median to leave, which, unfortunately, gave this guy enough time to pick up a rock, chuck it at my car, and unfortunately caused my rear view window to crack. I got out of that parking lot and saw the guy in my mirror chasing me for a second until I reached the intersection. I had only been asleep for about 2 hours, but with my heart now racing, I was fully awake and I decided not to stop driving. I didn't stop until the sun came up, to which I finally took a break at a McDonald's. I called my parents from there and I told them what happened, but tried keeping it lighthearted as to not worry my mother. And after talking to them and also a quick meal, I was feeling more grounded and I got back on the road to finish my drive. I arrived at my biological mother's home after that with no other incidents, but I also didn't stop again, other than for the normal food or restroom break. Obviously, I don't know what that guy's intentions were, but because of that feeling that wouldn't go away, I can't help but feel that it wasn't going to be to ask for more money or any innocent conversation. The fact that his demeanor changed within a second terrified me even more. So I was just glad that I got out of there before he was able to get in, and even more thankful that I woke up to the initial sounds. This happened to me and my boyfriend when we went on a road trip a few years ago. It wasn't our first one, nor the last, so we were pretty accustomed to the road. We knew our limits when it came to how long we could drive without stopping, when we needed to sleep and things like that. We both typically stayed awake to keep each other company, but one of us would occasionally take a nap if we knew that we were going to be switching out and driving through the night. That's what takes us to this incident that I wanted to share. We were taking a road trip towards the northeast to see one of our favorite bands, and it was only about a 20-hour drive. We wanted to do it in one go, giving us more time and money to spend at our destination. So we made arrangements and planned out how long we would both drive as to not have one person trained or driving more than the other. I felt like this was something that a lot of people don't think about, which can lead to a lot of accidents. So make sure to plan this out to some extent before getting to the road. The drive started fine, and I agreed to drive first, as my boyfriend, Wyatt, has better eyesight, and I also don't want to drive at night. We stopped as the sun was going down to fuel up and grab something quick to eat. And then, we started back on our path, knowing that we still had a bit of a drive ahead of us. However, I was starting to feel a bit drowsy, and after letting Wyatt know, he suggested that I try sleeping some to prepare in case that we needed to switch out. I asked him if he was sure, and he said that he was, affirming that he did not feel tired in the slightest. So, I got comfortable in my seat, and I started drifting off. It started as light dozing, where I could still hear the music playing, but your body feels heavy, and you know that you're starting to fall asleep. And soon after, I was pretty clean out, as I remember that I couldn't hear the music anymore. I don't recall the details of it now, but I know I was sleeping heavy enough that I was daydreaming at the time, because I remember thinking that it was weird. However, I was abruptly awoken by the worst scream that I have ever heard coming from Wyatt. I just remember it sounded like he was terrified, and when I opened my eyes, all I saw was a bright light that pretty much swallowed us. It was dead of night, yet all I could see was the light. That's when Wyatt hit the brakes and swerved the car over towards the side of the road. However, this ended up being a dream within a dream, I guess. Because when I woke up screaming, startling Wyatt enough to pull over to try and calm me, I remember tears streaming down my face and asking him what happened and what that was. But he looked so confused and asked me what I was talking about. After I finally stopped talking and listened to him, I realized that everything was fine. He said that nothing had happened on the road. In fact, there hadn't even been any cars in sight, and I woke up screaming, causing him to jump. So, I explained to him what I had seen or dreamt, I guess, and he comforted me again and said that we were okay. Everything felt so real, down to even hearing music playing and the low humming sound of the tires on the road. We sat there on the shoulder with our hazards on, just giving ourselves a moment to compose ourselves. We talked just to calm our nerves before getting back on the road. Wyatt then made some kind of joke and then asked me to grab a snack from our bag in the back. I reached back to grab it, and as I was turning back around and putting my seatbelt back on, we started to see some lights in the distance coming from the opposite direction. It was one of those quick glances for me at first, and I went back to opening our bag of chips, when we then started to hear the blaring sound of a semi-horn. Being on such an empty and dark road, it was odd to hear it, which caused us to look up again. We watched as we heard the horn getting louder and saw the lights getting closer and brighter. We watched as it got closer, and we were able to make out another light coming from the side of the truck. We watched as it got close enough to finally make out what the light was. It was actually sparks from where a tire should be. The truck had its cabin light and brights on and was practically laying on the horn. And we watched it pass us, horrified, as this huge semi slowly drifted through to the other lanes of traffic and was grinding the cement barrier on our side. We turned around and watched this until the light was barely visible and we could no longer hear the horn. I didn't know what to say or what to do. If we were still on the road, what would have happened to us? In my dream, it has to be related, right? I woke up to Wyatt's scream, but also a bright light, like what you would expect if an 18-wheeler was coming right at you, right? I think Wyatt was trying to keep me calm, or maybe himself, and then said, "Well, that was pretty scary." I nodded in agreement, but we just continued to sit there. After a few minutes, he pulled out his phone and then called 911 and reported what we just saw while I sat there silently. After the call ended, we got back on the road and then drove in silence, practically tensing up at every car that we saw that came from the opposite side. I think the incident did a number on both of us because we ended up stopping at some grocery store and then slept there overnight. The next morning, I still felt a little shaken, but I just tried to move on, thinking that we just got lucky. We continued being vigilant on the road, and then we enjoyed our vacation. The rest of the trip did not have anything similar happen, and Wyatt seemed like he got past it. But I still had this lingering in my head as to what all of that was about. I know deja vu. I've experienced that many times before, but this dream felt so real, like it happened but we just reset or something. Wyatt and I have since gone our separate ways, but we're still friends. However, we never talked about this since that time of that road trip, and when I had tried to bring it up before, he never wanted to talk about it either. Other than my sister and a friend, I haven't really talked to anyone about this because it's still something that disturbs me. But I finally felt the urge to share it to see if anyone else had experienced something similar. That way, at least, I would know that I am not alone. Hey there. I've been listening to your channel for a few months now, and hearing some of your older stories reminded me of an event that happened to me and a friend last year. This happened when me and my friend Morgan took a road trip to Las Vegas. It wasn't the first time that we had done this, and we've also learned a few things since our first trip. So by now, I felt that we were a bit more prepared. I took my car to the shop to make sure that everything was working as it should be. And then, we made a well-prepped cooler of healthy snacks and drinks, as well as a few energy drinks. We packed our bags and probably overpacked, but we made sure that we had everything, as well as some extras. I even refilled my emergency kit that I kept in my trunk. It had my normal first aid stuff, as well as a towel and a blanket, things like that. I had a few people make fun of me for my kit, including my boyfriend, saying that I was just overdoing it. And I always said that I would rather have it and never need it than, well, you know. I was living with Morgan and her sister at that time, which made it even more convenient for us, meaning that we're able to leave when we wanted without wasting more time meeting up. We stopped to have a light breakfast and also some coffee, and then we got on the road. The drive for the most part was very uneventful. I mean, it was a great drive. We did it in the early spring, so it wasn't cold and not too hot. It was honestly perfect. We just didn't have anything crazy or hectic happen or get in our way. We had several planned stops on the way, including a national park and museum, both of which were fantastic. I got to make my own geode, and it had a beautiful amethyst in it. I believe that we had just hit the Nevada border, and so we decided to stop at a hotel for the night. We still probably had about a day's worth of driving, so we wanted a place that we could stay and freshen up. And the hotel was your average hotel. We took our much-needed showers, enjoyed the included breakfast the next morning, and then just headed back to our car to get out of there. Well, this is where things got pretty chaotic. We probably had only been on the road for about an hour, just talking or whatever on a pretty open highway. There weren't many cars or whatsoever on the road, which was pretty nice. But then, I had a Jeep with dark tinted windows come up behind me. They weren't riding too close or anything, but it was just something that I took notice of. However, they did start getting closer, and again, I made a mental note of it. However, it wasn't consistent. They would get close and then let off, and then this would repeat. That's when I mentioned it to Morgan, because I thought that if they were in such a rush, why not just go around? It wasn't a single lane or anything, so they very well could have. Morgan said something about them either just being an ass or trying to be intimidating, and said not to worry about it too much at that time. However, it kept happening, and they were pushing it with how close they were getting, which made me lose my train of thought while we were talking. I pointed it out again to Morgan, and she turned back to look at it. We both agreed that it was getting weird and said that we should slow down. I was using cruise control, so I wasn't going under and was probably actually going slightly over. We were hoping that they would grow impatient and then finally just pass us. And it looked like that was finally happening when the Jeep went around. I was then in the lane next to me. They were parallel to me, and because of what they were doing, we both looked over at them. The side windows were also dark, so we didn't see the driver until they rolled down their window. What we saw was some normal-looking guy, completely bald head, wearing some kind of plain t-shirt and sunglasses. Yet, I could tell by the wrinkles on his forehead and the clenched jaw that he looked furious, and I had no idea why. I kind of looked at him with a, "Can I help you?" kind of look, because I didn't know what his problem was. As I mentioned, it's not like I was driving erratically or stopping him from going around. The guy then motioned for me to pull over, and I immediately shook my head no. That only seemed to enrage him more as he began yelling at me to pull over. I think I speak for the both of us when I say that we were starting to grow a bit uneasy. There weren't many cars around at that exact moment. We were the only ones. The guy then slowed down and got back behind us, so Morgan immediately pulled out her phone and started recording it. I just continued driving, hoping to see an exit soon. I was trying to change the GPS to the next exit or a gas station or anything that would put us around more people, when we felt the car jolt forward a bit. This guy had now hit my car. Morgan started screaming, and we were both asking what the hell this guy was trying to do. And then he rammed us again. I'm trying to keep us on the road while having a panic attack when Morgan said that she was going to call the cops and then turned back around in her seat. She was trying to explain to the dispatcher what was happening, and we were struggling to give our location. I knew the name of the highway, but I kept missing the mile markers due to being so obviously distracted. I was able to find it thanks to my GPS and the operator instructing Morgan to check it. As they were talking to us about what to do, the guy again went to the lane next to us, window down, and shouted something that I couldn't make out. I guess he wasn't satisfied because he then hit my car from the side, which made me swerve, and I had to try and correct it so I didn't run off the road. Morgan again was screaming to the operator what was happening when he hit us one more time, closer to the back, which caused a very hard fishtail to start. And yes, I know how to correct a car when that happens, before someone says anything, but my efforts were in vain because the guy again managed to hit me, causing us to careen into the oncoming exit barrels, the exit that we were going to try to take. We slammed into on the passenger side. Both of us were still conscious, but hurt. So we were completely aware that this guy had driven past, but backed up to look at us with a creepy smile and then took off again. That was the last time we saw him. We sat there sobbing, terrified that this guy might come back, and I was worried about how damaged my car was. We weren't even in the same state that we lived in. How would we get home if it was totaled? It wasn't long before another car approached us and stopped to see if we were okay. It was an older guy, like a lot older, so we weren't exactly afraid of him. He just looked like a normal Good Samaritan. I started explaining what happened while also trying to help Morgan find her phone that, of course, went flying out of her hand. And once we found it, the operator was still on the phone, which, by the way, after hearing the screams and crash, I applaud them for still being there for us. So, we told them what happened, and they explained that the officers were almost there. I was able to get out of my door, and Morgan had to climb over to my side to get out. The old man stayed with us until the police arrived, and we gave him a hug, thanking him for trying to keep us calm and offering his coffee to us. We gave the police as much information as we could about the man and also the vehicle and how this came out of nowhere. They tried to play it as road rage taken too far, but if so, it was only on one side. Like I said, I never even saw the Jeep prior to him tailgating me. I didn't recognize the man, nor did Morgan. We tried explaining this to the police, but whether or not they believed us, they did agree that it was taken way too far. We had my car towed to the nearest auto shop, and the cops gave us a ride there for us to wait. Sadly, the whole right side was smashed in and unable to open the front passenger door, but just about everything under the hood was still fine. They replaced the wheel on the passenger side since it was bent or something, and tried to pull out some of the dents on that same side, but the door was still difficult to open. Overall, we were pretty shaken up, and the fact that we were so close to our destination, we thought that it would be a waste to turn back. Once we had calmed down and the car was done, we took it slow, driving on some side roads until we were ready to get back on the highway. I was still super nervous about it, worried that that guy may have never exited or has just been in the same area. But thankfully, we never had any more incidents. That's not to say that I didn't have a slight mental freakout anytime I saw a Jeep or someone following a little too close. We gave the police our information in case that they ever saw the Jeep or the guy, but as of me writing this, neither of us have heard from them. And this experience was terrifying for both of us, but it also left us confused. Again, I get road rage. I have shamefully flipped some people the bird for cutting me off, but I would never try to risk their life. On top of this, I have no idea what the hell I could have done to set this guy off. We still go on road trips, Morgan and I together and with the others, but I don't think that I would ever forget the feeling that I had that day, or the feeling like I was being targeted, or even the feeling that someone wanted me dead, or at least severely injured. So, if you are on the road, just take some precautions. Make sure people know where you are and how to read mile markers, and always wear your seatbelt. When my parents got a divorce, me and my two brothers had to deal with a custody trade-off. During the summers, we'd go to my dad and stepmom's place for 1 to 2 weeks and then go back to my mom's. One summer, my dad and stepmom would be driving to the middle of nowhere, Iowa, to see her family, and you guessed it, that was the week at their place. I didn't care much to be around her side of the family, but I did enjoy the long car rides. They had a kid together, so it would be the 4 of us in their giant van that they had, which was also nice. I got to sit in the middle seat, meaning that I got a spot to myself. My stepsister is in the next seat to me, and my two little brothers in the back. This was before we had smartphones though, so all I had to keep me sane was my knockoff MP3 player and my drawing pad and a book that I was reading. So, off we were on this road trip for around 12 hours or so. Maybe it was longer, but being a kid, I know it felt like forever. We also had to stop overnight once. Once it started getting dark out, everyone was starting to fall asleep. I remember listening to my music when my dad said something to me. We were the only ones awake at that time. He said that he needed to stop to use the restroom and try to stay awake and ask if I needed to go, because it would probably be the last stop for the night. I told him no, so I just sat in the car and waited. After a few, he came back and we headed out for what I assume was a few more hours of driving. Not long after we left the gas station though, I ended up falling asleep. When I woke up, it was still pitch dark and the car was off and everyone else was fast asleep. I got up and I looked at the time on my dad's phone to see if anyone would be up soon. But it was only like 2 or 3 in the morning, so I assumed that we would still have a few hours before we were moving again. I laid back in my seat for a bit trying to fall back asleep, with no luck. My dad snores, like a lot, so I more so sat looking up at the roof, waiting to eventually pass out. But after a few minutes of that not working, I decided to look around to see if I could see anything. From the front, I couldn't see much, but a long concrete parking lot, and to the left, I could see the highway which was giving off the most light. And from my side, there appeared to be a small concrete building with one street lamp above it on the opposite side. It appeared that we were at the back of the building, as there weren't any doors on the side that I could see. At that time, I didn't know where we were or what I was looking at, and at the end of the parking lot on the side that I was on, there were some trees after it, like the type you see lining a highway. They were tall, bunched together, and you can barely be able to see past them. I decided that while I couldn't see much, I would try drawing the trees in hopes that that would make me tired. As I started drawing them, I looked back over to get a good reference when I noticed 2 particular shorter trees that looked dead. I started staring a little harder to try and focus and get a better idea of what I was looking at. At this point, I had my head to the window, hands cupped around them, staring out at these trees. That's when I finally realized that I wasn't looking at trees. The 2 shorter ones appeared to be legs. They weren't swaying and bending even slightly with the wind. They stood perfectly still until I saw them all move like they were going to walk away or readjust how they were standing. I couldn't see much of the head though, as it led right up to the dark parts of the trees. I thought, okay, so this is like a really big deer or something. So I continued to watch it for a bit, and then I tried to add the deer to my picture. When I looked back up, I didn't see it at first, thinking that it just moved. I then started looking around for it, and it didn't take long to find it as I saw something small fall from a tree that the creature was standing near. And then I watched it practically crawl down that same tree. It was actually pretty unsettling. I can only describe it as human, trying to walk on all fours or trying to climb a tree like a cat. The limbs were all just as long as I had seen them too. The head though, it looked horrendous. It was round like a human's, but it looked too big for the body, and it also had what appeared to be 2 small horns. Something told me that something wasn't right here, but I had to keep watching. As it finally got to the ground, I saw it lower its head and pretty much just tear apart whatever it got from that tree. It was horrible, and I was actually pretty freaked out. I thought this was a deer at first, but I didn't think that deers could climb trees, and I also didn't know that they were carnivorous. I stopped watching as I sat on the floor of the van, thinking about what I saw and what to do. Do I wake someone up? Do I still try to draw it? Or should I just keep watching it? Of course, I decided to look for it again. And when I looked back up, I noticed the thing had stopped moving again. So I did the same and I just stared and watched. That's when I think it got tired of me watching it too. I noticed that it turned in my direction instead of at a side and appeared to be looking right towards me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could tell. You get that feeling when you're being watched, and it was an awful feeling. I decided to go back in my seat, to cover my head up with a sweater that I was wearing, and try to fall back to sleep now. Unfortunately, the watching feeling was not going away. I uncovered my head, and I looked back out the window to see that this thing had gotten closer. I quickly covered my head back up, grabbed my MP3 player, and I tried to drown out my thoughts and silly fears. I was just a kid, so surely this was just an animal that I didn't know of, right? And after a while, I had finally fallen asleep. I woke up again due to my dad snoring and my music ending. And when I awoke, because of the way my head was facing, I could see out the front where it was still dark. And when I pulled my sweater down all the way, to my horror, I saw a face on the other side of my window, with their hands cupped around it. I could clearly see human eyes, but there was no nose, not even a slit where the nose could be. This, of course, made me scream and jump out of my seat, waking everyone else up. My stepmom, being startled, was the first to ask what happened. When I looked back at the window, there was nothing there. I didn't want to scare my siblings, so I just told them that a bird hit the window and scared me. My dad then went and walked around the car and didn't see anything, but since we were all awake, we just decided to go ahead and leave. Apparently, we had stopped at some kind of rest stop. The building we were parked by was a restroom, but there was not a single other vehicle around us. I didn't get out to use the restroom as I was too scared, and I decided to hold it until we stopped somewhere for breakfast. I still haven't told anyone other than a good friend of mine because I feel like I was just seeing things. And I didn't know if anyone would believe me. One thing that I do know that was real though was the drawing that I did that night that I recently found. Trees, darkness, and a deer-like creature with no head. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.